The December cold had teeth. That was the only way to describe it. Like the wind itself had grown fangs and was determined to bite through every layer of clothing I'd managed to accumulate over the past 6 months. I huddled deeper into the doorway of the abandoned bodega on Mulberry Street, pulling the oversized men's coat tighter around my frame. It had been 3 days since I'd eaten anything more substantial than the half-eaten bagel I'd found in a trash can outside Balthazar, and my stomach had moved past hunger into a kind of hollow numbness that was almost worse. New York City in winter was beautiful if you had somewhere warm to go. If you didn't, it was just cruel. I was 19 years old and I'd been invisible for exactly 7 months. Not metaphorically invisible. Actually invisible, the way homeless people become to the crowds that flow around them like water around stones. No one looked at me anymore. No one saw the girl I used to be, the one who'd had a scholarship to NYU, who'd had a future that stretched out bright and promising before her father's gambling debts and her mother's overdose had left me with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a choice between foster care at 18 or the streets. I'd chosen the streets. I'd chosen wrong. Move along. The voice was sharp, masculine, belonging to a security guard who'd materialized from the luxury restaurant across the street. Cesari's, the gold lettering on the window announced in elegant script. The kind of place where a single appetizer probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. "I'm not bothering anyone," I said, my voice coming out rougher than intended. 7 months of cold and hunger and sleeping in subway stations had stripped away the polish I'd once had. "You're bothering the customers," he replied, not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times. "They don't want to see," he gestured vaguely at me, at my situation, at everything I'd become. "This. When they're spending $200 on dinner." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. I wanted to argue, to point out that I wasn't asking anyone for anything, that I was just trying to survive until morning when the shelter opened and I could get in line for a bed that might or might not be available. But arguing took energy I didn't have, and dignity was a luxury I'd lost somewhere around month 3. I gathered my few possessions, a backpack containing everything I owned, which wasn't much, and stood on legs that had gone numb from the cold. The security guard watched me shuffle down the street, making sure I actually left, before returning to his post outside the restaurant's entrance. The street was busy despite the hour, almost 9 p.m., with well-dressed people flowing in and out of expensive restaurants and bars. Little Italy was like that. Tourist trap by day, playground for the wealthy by night. I'd learned to navigate it carefully, knowing which doorways offered the best shelter, which dumpsters behind which restaurants produced the most edible discards, which security guards would let you stay and which ones called the police. I was 3 blocks away when the craving hit. Not for food, though I was starving. For warmth. For the memory of what it felt like to be inside, to be part of the world instead of just surviving on its edges. Cesari's side alley beckoned. I'd been past it dozens of times, had noticed the service entrance, the loading dock, the way deliveries came and went through the back. The way heat escaped every time the kitchen door opened, carrying with it the scent of garlic and olive oil and fresh bread that made my empty stomach clench with longing. I shouldn't have gone closer. Should have kept walking, found another doorway, another night of cold and hunger and invisibility. But something pulled me toward that alley, toward that warmth, toward the illusion of being near civilization even if I couldn't be part of it. The service entrance was propped open, probably to let out kitchen heat. I could see inside to the organized chaos of dinner service. Chefs moving with practiced efficiency, waiters collecting plates, the gleam of stainless steel and the controlled fury of professional cooking. And the warmth. God, the warmth that poured out of that door like a gift. I positioned myself just outside the circle of light, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to remain unseen. This was survival. Stealing moments of comfort without taking anything that would be missed, existing in the spaces between attention. That was when I saw him. He came through the main dining room into a private area visible through a small window in the door that separated front of house from kitchen. Even from my position in the alley, I could see he was different from the other diners. It wasn't just the obviously expensive suit, though that was part of it. Charcoal gray with a subtle pattern that probably cost more than a car payment. It was the way the staff moved around him, the deference in their posture, the way the maitre d' personally escorted him to a table that had been held despite the restaurant being obviously fully booked. Power. That was what I was seeing. Real power, the kind that bent the world to accommodate it. He was maybe mid-30s, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. All strong lines and sharp angles, Mediterranean features that suggested Italian heritage. Even from a distance I could see the intensity in his eyes, the way they swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone who'd learned to identify threats before they materialized. I'd seen men like him before. My father had owed money to men like him. Had made promises to men like him that he couldn't keep. Had died because men like him didn't forgive debt or betrayal. I should have looked away, should have focused on the warmth and ignored the drama of the wealthy and dangerous. But there was something magnetic about him, something that held my attention even as my rational mind screamed that noticing people like him was how invisible people got hurt. The kitchen door opened fully as a waiter exited with a tray of dishes. In that moment of clarity I could see directly into the private dining area where the man sat. He wasn't alone. 2 others flanked him, both built like athletes, both with the alert posture of bodyguards. Security. Protection. And then I saw the cook. He was older, maybe 50, with the tired eyes of someone who'd worked in kitchens his entire life. He moved through the space with the confidence of familiarity, carrying a covered plate toward the private dining room. Nothing unusual about that, except for the way his hand shook slightly as he lifted the silver dome, except for the bead of sweat that ran down his temple despite the kitchen's professional climate control, except for the way his eyes darted toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. I knew that look. Had seen it on my father's face in the weeks before he died. Fear. Guilt. The expression of someone who'd been forced into something they didn't want to do but couldn't refuse. The cook placed the dish in front of the man in the gray suit. Veal piccata, from what I could see, medallions in a lemon caper sauce that would probably be transcendent if you were lucky enough to taste it. The man nodded his thanks, dismissing the cook, reaching for his fork. And the cook practically ran back to the kitchen, his relief at having completed his task visible even from my position in the alley. Something was wrong. Every instinct I'd developed over 7 months of surviving on the streets was screaming at me. The cook's behavior, the way he'd fled, the barely suppressed panic in his movements, it all pointed to something bad, something dangerous, something that was about to happen to the man who was even now lifting his fork toward the veal. I should have stayed silent. Should have remained invisible. Should have remembered that getting involved in other people's danger was how you went from homeless to dead. But I'd been invisible for 7 months. I'd watched the world flow around me like I didn't exist. I'd accepted every indignity, every dismissal, every moment of being treated like I wasn't quite human. And something in me, some part that remembered being a person with agency and voice and the ability to affect outcomes, rebelled against staying silent one more time. I moved before I could think better of it, stepping into the light of the kitchen entrance, my appearance shocking the line cooks into momentary silence. I was aware of how I must look. Filthy coat, tangled hair I hadn't been able to wash properly in days, the desperate edge that clung to people living on the streets. But I pushed forward anyway, my eyes locked on the private dining room visible through the service window. Stop. The word came out hoarse, desperate. Don't eat that. Chaos erupted. Security materialized from nowhere. Not just the bodyguards I'd seen, but others who'd been positioned throughout the restaurant. Hands grabbed at me, voices shouted in Italian and English, demanding to know who I was, how I'd gotten in, what I thought I was doing. But through the confusion I saw him. The man in the gray suit had frozen, fork halfway to his mouth, his dark eyes locked on mine through the window with an intensity that made my breath catch. For a moment everything else fell away. The hands restraining me, the shouting, the fear and cold and hunger. There was only him, only that moment of connection between a homeless girl no one should have noticed and a man whose attention could mean life or death. The cook, I gasped, fighting against the grip on my arms. Something's wrong with your food. He was scared, sweating, looking at the exits. I know that look. Someone forced him to do something. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Calculation. Assessment. The rapid processing of information that separated those who survived in dangerous worlds from those who didn't. He set down the fork. Slowly. Deliberately. Never breaking eye contact with me. Then he spoke, his voice carrying authority that silenced the chaos instantly. Bring her to me. The private dining room was even more luxurious up close. Cream-colored walls adorned with original artwork. A table set with china and crystal that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. the subtle scent of expensive wine and fresh flowers. And him, sitting at the head of the table with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to occupy space. His bodyguards had deposited me in a chair across from him, not gently but not roughly either, as if they weren't quite sure what to make of this situation. I was aware of my smell, of the dirt under my fingernails, of how completely I didn't belong in this space. But I kept my head up, kept my eyes on his, refusing to shrink even though everything in me wanted to disappear. "Your name," he said. Not a question, a command. "Sophie." My real name, not the fake one I'd been using at the shelters. Something about his intensity demanded honesty. "Sophie Chin." "Sophie Chin," he repeated as if testing the weight of it. "And you are?" "Homeless," I said flatly. "Invisible. Someone who shouldn't have been close enough to notice anything about your dinner." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile but close. "Yet you were. And you are." He gestured to the plate of veal still sitting untouched before him. "You believe someone has tampered with this?" "I know what fear looks like," I replied. "I know how people act when they've been forced to do something against their will." That cook, he was terrified. And the only reason someone would be terrified after serving you a plate is if they'd done something to it they didn't want to do. One of the bodyguards leaned down, whispering rapidly in Italian. I caught enough to understand. They were suggesting I was crazy, desperate, trying to scam money or attention. That I should be removed and forgotten. But the man held up a hand, silencing them. His eyes never left my face, studying me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously exposed and seen in a way I hadn't been in months. "Marco," he said quietly. "Find the cook. Bring him here." The larger bodyguard nodded, disappearing through the kitchen door with two others following. The man, I still didn't know his name, though I suspected if I'd been paying attention to New York's criminal underworld I would have recognized him, pulled out his phone, typing something rapidly before setting it aside. "You take a significant risk," he observed. "Coming here making accusations. If you're wrong, you've wasted my time. If you're right," he paused, something dangerous flickering in his expression. "If you're right, you've just made yourself visible to people who prefer witnesses don't exist." "I'm already invisible," I said, the words bitter. "Have been for 7 months. No ID, no address, no family, no one who'd notice if I disappeared. Being dead doesn't seem that different from how I've been living." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, I don't think men like him did pity, but recognition perhaps. Understanding. "Everyone has someone," he said quietly. "Family, friends, connections that tie them to the world. I had a father who gambled himself to death and a mother who chose heroin over everything else, including me," I replied flatly. "They're both gone. I had a scholarship to NYU, but when your parents die leaving nothing but debt and you age out of the system at 18, scholarships don't cover eating or having an address to register from. So no, I don't have anyone. I'm exactly as alone as I appear to be." Before he could respond, Marco returned, practically dragging the cook between him and another guard. The older man's eyes were wild with fear, his body trembling, his shirt soaked with sweat that had nothing to do with kitchen heat. The man in the gray suit stood, moving with fluid grace that suggested violence was something he knew intimately. He approached the cook with measured steps, each one deliberate, controlled. "Antonio," he said, his voice gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "We've worked together for how long?" 5 years. 6, the cook whispered. 6 years, Mr. Caruso. The name clicked into place in my memory. Fragments of news stories I'd seen in discarded newspapers, whispered conversations I'd overheard in shelters. Vincent Caruso. Not just a wealthy businessman, but the head of one of New York's most powerful crime families. The kind of man my father had borrowed money from and failed to repay. 6 years, Vincent repeated. "And in that time have I ever been anything but fair with you? Have I ever threatened your family, your job, your safety?" "No, sir." Antonio's voice broke. "Never. You've been good to me. To my family." "Then why," Vincent said, his voice dropping to something deadly soft, "did you just try to poison me?" Antonio collapsed. Not metaphorically, his legs literally gave out and only Marco's grip on his arm kept him from hitting the floor. Tears streamed down his weathered face, and the words poured out in a mixture of Italian and English, too fast and panicked for me to follow completely. Vincent listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Antonio finally ran out of words and breath, Vincent turned to Marco. Confirm it. Test the food. I want to know what and how much. Marco nodded, carefully removing the plate from the table using a napkin to avoid direct contact, disappearing into the kitchen with it. Vincent returned to his seat across from me, his movements still controlled despite what had just been revealed. It seems, he said quietly, that you've saved my life tonight, Sophie Chen. What did they use to force him? I asked, my street-smart instincts understanding the pattern even if I hadn't caught all the words. Threats against his family? His daughter, Vincent confirmed, his jaw tight with controlled fury. Someone took her this afternoon. Told Antonio he'd get her back alive if he added a particular powder to my meal. Told him she'd die screaming if he refused or if he warned me. The casual cruelty of it made my stomach turn. Will you find her? I already have people looking, he replied. And when we find whoever orchestrated this, they'll learn that threatening innocent families has consequences. The promise of violence in his voice was absolute. Marco returned, his expression grim. He leaned down, whispering to Vincent in rapid Italian. I caught the word arsenico, arsenic. Enough to kill apparently, but slowly, painfully over hours rather than minutes. Vincent's hands clenched briefly on the table, the only visible sign of reaction. Then he looked at me with an intensity that made my heart pound in my chest. You see that cook's fear from an alley in the cold, he said slowly, while everyone else in this restaurant, trained security, experienced staff, people paid to notice threats, saw nothing. You risk yourself, risk exposure, risk everything to warn a stranger. He paused. Why? The honest answer was complicated. Because I was tired of being invisible. Because some part of me remembered being a person who could affect outcomes. Because for 7 months I'd watched the world treat me like I didn't exist, and something in me had needed to prove I was still human, still capable of choice and action. But what I said was simpler. Because I know what it looks like when someone's about to die. And I thought maybe this time someone should do something about it. Vincent studied me for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, making a call that consisted of 3 sentences in Italian delivered with absolute authority. When he ended it, he looked at me again. You're coming with me, he said. Not a request. Why? I asked, even though I already knew. I'd seen too much. Knew too much. Was a witness to an attempted assassination, even if all I'd done was notice what no one else had. Because, Vincent said, standing and offering me his hand, a gesture so unexpected from a man of his power that I stared at it for a moment before taking it. You've just saved my life and I repay my debts. And because anyone who orchestrated this attack knows someone warned me. They'll look for that someone. And when they find out it was a homeless girl with no protection and no resources. He didn't finish, didn't need to. So I'm either under your protection or I'm dead, I said flatly. Essentially, yes. I should have been terrified. Should have run, should have taken my chances on the streets. But I looked at Vincent Caruso, at the power he represented, at the warmth of the restaurant, at the first genuine human connection I'd had in 7 months, and I made a choice. I took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, steady. The kind of grip that suggested he didn't make promises he couldn't keep. As he helped me to my feet, our eyes met and something passed between us. Recognition of a kind I couldn't name. Understanding that this moment had changed both our trajectories irrevocably. Marco, Vincent said, still holding my hand. Bring the car around. And have someone prepare the guest suite. He looked at me. Tonight you sleep somewhere warm and safe. Tomorrow we figure out who tried to kill me and why. And after that, he paused, something almost like respect in his expression. After that we'll see what happens to the girl who saved my life. As we moved toward the exit, past the gaping staff and the confused patrons who'd been kept away from the private room, I caught sight of myself in a mirror on the wall. The homeless girl was still there, dirty coat, tangled hair, hollow cheeks. But something had changed in my eyes. Some spark that had been dying over 7 months of invisibility had reignited. I'd been nobody for so long. Maybe it was time to be somebody again. Even if that somebody existed in the dangerous orbit of Vincent Caruso. The car was unlike anything I'd ever been in. Sleek black exterior with windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors, interior that smelled of leather and expensive cologne, seats that felt like butter against my filthy clothes. I was acutely aware of how I must be contaminating this pristine space, of the dirt I was leaving on surfaces that probably cost more to clean than I used to spend on food in a month. Vincent sat beside me in the back seat, his posture relaxed despite what had just happened, despite the assassination attempt he'd narrowly avoided. Marco drove, another guard in the passenger seat, both men alert and scanning the streets even as we moved through late evening traffic with the kind of speed that suggested traffic laws were optional when Vincent Caruso was in a hurry. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse and the cold I'd been fighting for days. "Somewhere safe," Vincent replied, typing something on his phone. "My home in Greenwich Village. 3-story brownstone, security that rivals most government buildings, staff who know how to be discreet. And the cook's daughter?" The question came out before I could stop it, before I remembered that homeless girls who'd just been rescued probably shouldn't question their rescuers' priorities. Vincent looked up from his phone, something flickering in his expression. "Already located. My people found her an hour ago. They were holding her in a basement in Queens. She's being returned to her family as we speak, unharmed." He paused. "Antonio will face consequences for attempting to poison me even under duress. But his family won't suffer for his coercion. I don't punish innocent people for other men's sins." The distinction seemed important to him and I filed it away. This was a man who operated by a code, even if that code existed outside conventional morality. Rules that made sense in his world even if they wouldn't make sense anywhere else. "The people who took her," I said carefully. "The ones who forced Antonio to poison you. What happens to them?" His smile was cold, predatory. "They'll learn that attempting to kill me has consequences that are both final and educational for anyone else who might consider similar action." He returned his attention to his phone. "But that's not your concern, Sophie. Your concern is recovery, food, warmth, rest. You look like you haven't had any of those things in far too long." He wasn't wrong. I could feel exhaustion pulling at me now that the adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, could feel the hollow ache of hunger that had become so constant I'd almost stopped noticing it, could feel the deep chill in my bones that came from too many nights sleeping in doorways and subway stations. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question that had been building since he'd taken my hand in the restaurant. "I warned you, yes, but you could have just thanked me and sent me on my way. Why bring me home? Why offer protection? Why risk your security by introducing an unknown element into your space?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying me with that same intensity that made me feel like he was seeing past all the layers I'd built up over 7 months of survival. "Because you risked everything to save a stranger," he said finally. "Because you noticed what trained security missed. Because you chose to speak when staying silent would have been safer." He paused. "And because I know what it looks like when someone has been discarded by the world, and I think you deserve better than freezing to death in an alley because you made the choice to save my life." The words settled over me like a blanket. Unexpected kindness from a man who probably ordered deaths with the same casual efficiency he ordered dinner. I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed silent, watching the city slide past the tinted windows as we moved from Little Italy into Greenwich Village, from the crowded chaos of tourism into the more refined wealth of old New York money. The brownstone was exactly what he'd described, elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of building that had been standing for over a century and would probably stand for another. Security was subtle but present. Cameras at every angle, reinforced doors, windows that I suspected were bulletproof, the kind of setup that protected without advertising vulnerability. Inside was warmth. Real warmth, the kind that sank into your bones and made you realize just how cold you'd been for so long. The entryway opened into a space that was both luxurious and comfortable. Hardwood floors covered with expensive rugs, artwork on walls that looked original rather than reproductions, furniture that suggested someone actually lived here rather than just existing in a showpiece. A woman appeared from somewhere in the house's interior, late 50s, gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun, dressed in clothes that suggested staff but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd been with the family long enough to have earned respect rather than just employment. "Maria," Vincent said, his tone warming slightly. "This is Sophie Chen. She'll be staying with us for the foreseeable future. Please prepare the guest suite and have Dr. Castellano come by in the morning for a full examination." Maria's eyes swept over me, taking in my condition with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen many things in her years of service. But there was no judgment in her expression, only concern. Of course, Mr. Caruso. Shall I draw a bath and find suitable clothing? Please. And Maria? Vincent's voice dropped slightly. She hasn't eaten properly in some time. Something gentle on the stomach but substantial. Soup, bread, perhaps some fruit. I'll prepare it myself, Maria said, her attention shifting fully to me now. Come dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. You look like you're about to fall over. She wasn't wrong. Now that I was finally warm and safe, the exhaustion I'd been fighting for months was crashing over me like a wave. I let Maria guide me up a staircase that curved gracefully to the second floor, past more artwork and photographs that I was too tired to examine closely, into a bedroom that was larger than the entire apartment I'd shared with my mother before everything fell apart. The guest suite was done in soft blues and creams, with a four-poster bed that looked like something from a period drama, windows that overlooked a small private garden, and an attached bathroom that was all marble and gold fixtures and a bathtub deep enough to drown in. Maria moved through the space with efficient care, starting the bath water, laying out towels that were thick and soft and probably cost more than my entire wardrobe used to be worth. I'll find you some clothes, she said gently. They'll be too large, but they'll be clean and warm. Take as long as you need in the bath. The water heater is excellent, it won't run cold. I'll leave food outside the door so you can eat in privacy if you prefer. She left before I could thank her, before I could process the kindness that didn't expect anything in return. I stood in that bathroom looking at the bath filling with hot water and fragrant bubbles, at the pristine towels and the expensive soaps, at the mirror that reflected a girl I barely recognized anymore. I stripped off the layers of clothing I'd been wearing for weeks, the oversized men's coat I'd found in a donation box, the hoodie beneath it that had been my father's, the jeans that were held together more by dirt than fabric at this point. I left them in a pile on the floor, these remnants of my invisible life, and stepped into water so hot it almost hurt. And then I cried. For the first time in 7 months, I let myself cry, for my father and his gambling addiction that had destroyed our family, for my mother and her inability to survive his death without chemical escape, for the scholarship and the future I'd lost, for every night spent cold and hungry and afraid, for every moment of being treated like I was less than human. I cried until the water cooled and my tears ran out, until I'd purged something that had been building inside me since the day I'd chosen the streets over foster care. When I finally emerged, scrubbed clean with soap that smelled like lavender and wrapped in a towel that was softer than any blanket I'd slept under in months, I found clothes laid out on the bed, sweatpants and a cashmere sweater that were indeed too large but felt like heaven against my clean skin, thick socks, even underwear still in packaging. And on a tray by the bed, soup that was still steaming, fresh bread with butter, sliced fruit that looked like it had been carefully selected for someone whose stomach might be sensitive after prolonged hunger. I ate slowly, carefully, knowing from experience that eating too much too fast after deprivation could make you sick. The soup was chicken and rice, simple but perfectly seasoned, the kind of thing that felt like it could heal you from the inside out. The bread was still warm from the oven. The fruit was sweet and fresh and tasted like luxury. When I'd finished, exhaustion pulled at me with irresistible force. The bed was calling, those soft sheets and thick comforter promising rest that I hadn't had in so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to sleep without fear. I climbed under the covers, sinking into a mattress that seemed to embrace me, and for the first time in 7 months I felt safe. I was asleep before I could analyze what that safety would ultimately cost. Morning arrived with winter sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains and the smell of coffee and fresh pastries wafting up from somewhere below. I woke disoriented, my mind struggling to reconcile the soft bed and warm room with the reality I'd been living for months. For a moment I thought it might have been a dream. The restaurant, Vincent Caruso, the assassination attempt, all of it just a fantasy my hungry mind had created to escape the cold. Then I saw my reflection in the mirror across the room. Clean hair, clean skin, wearing clothes that weren't mine, in a room that definitely wasn't a doorway or a shelter. It had been real. All of it. There was a soft knock at the door. Maria entered when I called out, carrying a tray with coffee, orange juice and pastries that made my stomach growl despite having eaten the night before. "Good morning, dear," she said warmly. "Mr. Caruso asked me to let you know that Dr. Castellano will be here in an hour for your examination. He wants to make sure you're healthy, that there's no lasting damage from," she paused delicately, "from your recent circumstances." "That's not necessary," I started, but Maria's expression stopped me. "Mr. Caruso insists," she said gently. And between you and me, when he insists, it's easier to simply comply. He doesn't do it often, and when he does, it's because he actually cares about the outcome. She set the tray on the small table by the window, then moved to a closet I hadn't explored the night before, pulling out more clothes. Jeans that looked like they might actually fit, several shirts and sweaters, even a proper jacket. These were purchased this morning, Maria explained. Mr. Caruso had someone estimate your size and do emergency shopping. They should be more appropriate than borrowed items. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I stared at the clothes, at the casual evidence of resources being deployed on my behalf. He bought me clothes. Without asking. He's a man accustomed to solving problems, Maria said with a slight smile. And to him, you not having appropriate clothing was a problem with a straightforward solution. Don't read too much into it, it's how he operates. Efficiently, thoroughly, with the assumption that his decisions are correct. There was affection in her voice, the kind that came from years of loyal service to someone who'd earned it. I wondered how long she'd been with Vincent, what she'd seen, what she knew about the darker aspects of his business. Is he always like this? I asked. Taking in strangers, providing for them, treating their problems as his responsibility? Maria's expression grew thoughtful. Mr. Caruso has many facets, she said carefully. He can be ruthless when necessary, I won't lie to you about that. He operates in a world that requires hardness, decisiveness, the willingness to do terrible things when circumstances demand it. But he also has a code, principles that guide his actions even when those actions exist outside conventional morality. She paused. You saved his life. That creates a debt in his mind, one he'll feel obligated to repay regardless of the cost. But more than that, I think he sees something in you that resonates with his own history. What history? I asked, curiosity overriding politeness. That's his story to tell, Maria replied. But suffice to say, he understands what it means to have the world discount you, to fight for survival against odds that should have destroyed you, to choose hardness over surrender. He sees that in you, I think. And it matters to him. She moved toward the door, then paused. The clothes are yours, Sophie. Whatever happens going forward, whatever choices you make, those are yours to keep. As is the money that's been deposited in the account opened in your name. Enough to start over if you choose to leave, enough to have options beyond the streets. She left before I could process what she'd said. An account. In my name. Money that was mine, that I could access, that represented freedom and choice and the ability to rebuild a life. Vincent Caruso had given me back my agency while I slept. Dr. Castellano was a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and efficient hands, who examined me with professional thoroughness while asking questions about my health history that I answered as honestly as I could. She took blood samples, checked my vitals, examined the cough I'd developed over the past weeks, and made notes on a tablet with the focused attention of someone who took her work seriously. You're malnourished, she said finally, her tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. Not critically but significantly. You've lost muscle mass, your immune system is compromised, and you're fighting several minor infections that your body hasn't had the resources to properly combat. The cough is bronchitis, relatively mild but requiring antibiotics. You're also anemic and showing signs of vitamin deficiencies. She looked up from her tablet, meeting my eyes directly. All of these things are treatable, reversible with proper nutrition, medication, and rest. You're young, which works in your favor. Your body wants to heal, it just needs the resources to do so. How long? I asked. Until I'm back to normal? With proper care? 6 to 8 weeks for the infections to clear and nutritional deficits to be addressed. 3 to 4 months for full recovery of muscle mass and optimal health. She paused. But that assumes you continue to have access to food, shelter, medical care. Mr. Caruso indicated you'd be staying here for the foreseeable future, which makes treatment much more straightforward. She prescribed medications, gave Maria detailed instructions about nutrition and supplements, and left with a promise to return in 2 weeks for follow-up. After she'd gone, I found myself alone in the guest suite, processing the surreal reality of my situation. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been homeless, invisible, slowly dying from exposure and neglect. Now I had clean clothes, a warm bed, medical care, and apparently enough money to start over if I wanted to leave. It was too much, too fast, too impossibly generous from a man I barely knew. There had to be a cost. There was always a cost. I found Vincent in what Maria called the study, a room lined with books and dominated by a large desk where he sat reviewing documents with the same focused intensity he'd brought to assessing threats at the restaurant. He looked up when I entered, his expression shifting from business to something warmer. "Sophie," he said, setting aside the papers. "Dr. Castellano gave me her report. You're going to be fine with proper care, which is a relief." "Why are you doing this?" I asked directly. "The clothes, the doctor, the money," Maria mentioned. "You've repaid whatever debt you think you owe for me warning you. I could leave now, start over somewhere else. Why go beyond that?" Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark, assessing eyes. "Because you're not safe," he said simply. "The people who tried to kill me last night, they're not going to stop at one failed attempt. They'll try again, and when they do, they'll eliminate anyone who witnessed their first failure. That includes you, Sophie. You're a loose end, a witness who can connect them to attempted murder. Letting you walk away even with money would be sending you to your death. So I'm protective custody," I said flatly. "A witness you're keeping alive to potentially testify or provide information." "You're someone I'm keeping alive because you deserve to live," he corrected, something sharp in his voice. "Because you made a choice to save me when you could have stayed silent, and I won't repay that by abandoning you to the consequences. Yes, you're under my protection because you're in danger because of me. But you're also here because I want you to be, because I think you deserve a chance to rebuild the life that was taken from you." He stood, moving around the desk to stand closer. "Maria told you about the money. That's real, Sophie. That's yours regardless of what you choose to do. If you want to leave, if you want to take that money and disappear into some other city where my enemies won't think to look for you, I'll arrange it. New identity, new history, a fresh start with no strings attached." "But," I prompted, because there was always a but. "But," he continued, "if you stay, if you choose to remain under my protection while we identify and eliminate the threat against both of us, then you'll have the opportunity to become something more than just a witness I'm keeping safe." Maria said, "I saw something in you." She's right. I see intelligence, survival instinct, the ability to notice what others miss. Those are valuable skills, Sophie. Skills that could be developed, refined, put to use in ways that would give you not just safety but purpose. "You're offering me a job," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "Working for you. In your organization. I'm offering you an opportunity to learn what I do, how I operate, to see if you have aptitude for the strategic thinking that keeps people alive in dangerous situations. If you do, if you prove capable, then yes, eventually a position. But that's getting ahead of ourselves." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more in private than his public persona revealed. "First you recover. You eat, rest, heal, remember what it's like to be safe and warm and cared for. Then if you're interested, we talk about the future." I should have been afraid. Should have recognized the danger of being drawn into the orbit of a man who operated outside the law, who ordered deaths and controlled criminal enterprises. But I looked at Vincent Caruso and I saw someone who understood survival, who valued the choice I'd made to speak instead of staying silent, who was offering me not just safety but agency, the ability to affect my own future rather than just existing at the mercy of circumstances. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Maria said you understand what it's like to be discounted, to fight against odds that should have destroyed you. What made you that way?" His expression shifted, something painful flickering beneath the control. "My father was a foot soldier in someone else's organization," he said quietly. "Competent but poor, loyal but disposable. He died when I was 12, killed in a territory dispute that his bosses could have prevented but didn't because foot soldiers were cheaper to replace than conflicts were to resolve." He paused. "My mother cleaned houses to feed us, worked herself sick trying to provide. I grew up watching powerful men waste lives because those lives didn't matter to them, because people like us were just tools to be used and discarded." "So you became powerful," I said, understanding. "So you'd never be disposable again." "So I'd never be helpless again," he corrected. "Power is a means, Sophie, not an end. I built this organization, yes. I control territory and businesses and command loyalty from dangerous men. But what I really built was agency, the ability to decide my own fate, to protect the people who matter to me, to ensure that when someone threatens what's mine, I have the resources to end that threat permanently." He looked at me with intensity that made my breath catch. You've been helpless for 7 months. Invisible, discounted, treated like you don't matter. I'm offering you the chance to matter again, to have the power to affect your own story rather than just surviving at the edges of other people's decisions. That's worth more than money, Sophie. That's worth the risks that come with staying. The offer hung between us, glittering with possibility and danger in equal measure. I thought about the streets, about the cold and hunger and invisibility I'd endured. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one with a scholarship and a future, who'd been destroyed by circumstances she couldn't control. And I thought about who I might become if I stayed, if I learned from Vincent Caruso, if I chose power over vulnerability. I'll stay, I said, the words coming from some deep place of certainty. Not forever, not without understanding what I'm agreeing to. But I'll stay long enough to recover, to learn, to see if this is really an opportunity or just a different kind of cage. His smile was genuine, warm in a way that transformed his face from intimidating to almost gentle. That's all I ask. Time, observation, the chance to prove that what I'm offering is real. He extended his hand. Partners in survival, Sophie Chin. At least for now. I took his hand, feeling the warmth of his grip, the strength that suggested he kept his promises. Partners, I agreed. For now. As we stood there, hands clasped, I felt something shift inside me. Some part of me that had been dying over 7 months of invisibility suddenly coming back to life. I didn't know where this path would lead, didn't know if staying was wisdom or folly. But I knew I was done being invisible. And that was enough. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both strange and increasingly comfortable. I ate regularly. Maria's carefully calibrated meals designed to rebuild my strength without overwhelming my recovering system. I slept in that impossibly soft bed, waking without the constant alertness that had marked my months on the streets. I took the medications Dr. Castellano prescribed, felt my cough gradually easing, felt energy returning to a body that had been running on empty for so long. And I watched. Vincent had given me permission to observe, to move through the brownstone freely, to see how his world operated from the inside. I sat in on meetings conducted in the study, listening to conversations in Italian and English about shipments and territories and business deals that were sometimes legitimate and sometimes decidedly not. I watched how he commanded loyalty, how men twice his age deferred to his judgment, how he made decisions with a combination of strategic thinking and gut instinct that seemed to always lead to the right outcome. But I also saw the other side. The late-night calls about problems that needed solving. The way his expression went cold and remote when discussing threats or betrayals. The morning he left early and returned with blood on his shirt cuff that Maria cleaned without comment. The reality that his power was maintained through violence as much as intelligence, that the agency he offered came with a cost counted in other people's fear and pain. I should have been horrified. Should have recognized the danger of being drawn deeper into this world. But I'd spent 7 months learning that the legitimate world didn't protect people like me, that following rules and trusting systems led to homelessness and invisibility and slow death from exposure. Vincent's world was brutal, yes, but it was also honest about its brutality. There were no pretenses, no false promises of justice that never came. 2 weeks after I'd arrived, Vincent called me into the study after dinner. His expression was serious, carrying weight that immediately put me on alert. "We've identified who was behind the assassination attempt," he said without preamble. "Marco has been investigating, following the connections back from Antonio's coercion. It leads to the Rossini family, specifically Carlo Rossini, who's been trying to expand his territory into areas I control. The attempt on my life was meant to create chaos in my organization, make space for him to move in and absorb my operations while my people were distracted by succession disputes. What happens now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Now we respond," Vincent said simply. "We demonstrate that attempting to kill me has consequences, that threatening innocent families to accomplish murder is unacceptable, that the Rossini organization will pay a price that makes my territory too expensive to pursue." "You're going to kill him," I said flatly. "Carlo Rossini. I'm going to eliminate a threat that has already demonstrated willingness to kill me and harm innocents to achieve his goals," Vincent corrected. "Yes, Sophie. That's what happens in my world. Threats get eliminated permanently before they can try again and succeed." He watched me carefully, assessing my reaction. "This bothers you." "It should bother me," I replied honestly. Taking a life, even in self-defense or retaliation, should be something that weighs on a person. But I keep thinking about Antonio's daughter, about how they terrorized that family, about how they would have killed you and probably killed me as a witness, and I can't seem to feel the moral outrage I probably should feel. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Not quite approval but recognition. You're understanding the reality of this world faster than I expected. Most people can't make that transition, can't accept that sometimes justice requires darkness, that protecting what matters means being willing to do terrible things. My father's gambling debts got him killed, I said quietly. The men he owed money to murdered him in our kitchen while my mother screamed. And nothing happened to them. No arrests, no justice, no consequences. The system didn't protect us because we didn't matter enough. Because legitimate channels only work for people with legitimate power. I met his eyes. So yes, I understand that sometimes darkness is the only option. I just don't know yet if I can be part of delivering it, or if I can only accept it from a distance. That's honest, Vincent said. And that's okay. You don't have to be part of the violence, Sophie. You can stay here, continue recovering, continue learning the strategic elements without ever touching the brutal realities that make those strategies necessary. He paused. But you should know what happens when you stay in my orbit. You should understand fully what my protection costs, what being associated with me means. I want to see, I heard myself say, surprising us both. Not participate, not yet, maybe not ever. But I want to witness what happens to Carlo Rossini. I want to understand completely what justice looks like in your world so I can make an informed choice about whether I can live with that reality. Vincent studied me for a long moment, some internal calculation happening behind his dark eyes. Then he nodded once. Tomorrow night. The Rossini organization's headquarters is a restaurant in Brooklyn, ironically similar to Cesari's. We'll go there, we'll confront Carlo, and you'll see exactly what consequences look like when someone tries to kill Vincent Caruso. And after? I asked. After I've seen it, understood it completely? After, he said softly, you decide if you're staying or leaving. If this world is one you can inhabit or if you'd rather take the money and disappear into a safer life. His expression grew almost vulnerable. I hope you stay, Sophie. I think you have potential to be extraordinary in this environment. But I want you to stay with full knowledge, not because you felt trapped or obligated or didn't understand what you were choosing. The honesty was disarming and I found myself nodding. Tomorrow night then. I witness. I understand. And then I choose. Then you choose, he agreed. Whatever that choice is, I'll respect it. But as I left the study and returned to my room, I wondered if I was being honest with myself about what I'd already chosen. I'd been in Vincent Caruso's home for 2 weeks. I'd eaten his food, worn clothes he'd provided, accepted medical care he'd arranged. I'd watched him operate with a combination of strategic brilliance and brutal efficiency. And somewhere in all of that I'd started to admire him, not just for his power but for his competence, his code, his understanding of what it took to survive in a world that ground down anyone who couldn't fight back. Tomorrow I'd witness violence. Tomorrow I'd see what justice looked like when delivered by a man who operated outside the law. And tomorrow I'd have to decide if I could become someone who accepted that darkness as necessary, or if some part of me still believed in the legitimate world that had failed to protect me. I suspected I already knew which choice I'd make. The girl who'd frozen in doorways was gone. Someone harder was taking her place. And I wasn't sure if that was tragedy or survival. Maybe it was both. The restaurant in Brooklyn looked almost identical to Cesari's from the outside. Elegant signage, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, the kind of place where power brokers and wealthy families came for authentic Italian cuisine and the illusion of old-world sophistication. But I'd learned enough over the past 2 weeks to recognize the differences that mattered. The security was harder here, more obvious. Men positioned at intervals who weren't trying to blend in, cameras that tracked movement with military precision, the subtle bulge of weapons beneath expensive suits. This was a fortress disguised as a restaurant. Carlo Rossini had built his headquarters to withstand assault, to project strength, to warn potential enemies that attacking him would be costly. Vincent had brought a small team, Marco and 5 others, all men I'd seen around the brownstone over the past weeks, all carrying themselves with the controlled readiness of soldiers preparing for battle. I sat in the back of the SUV with Vincent, watching the restaurant through tinted windows, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something darker that I didn't want to name. Last chance, Vincent said quietly. You can stay in the car, or Marco can take you back to the brownstone. You don't have to witness this, Sophie. I want to understand, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Completely. No filtered version, no sanitized summary. If I'm going to choose whether to stay in your world, I need to see what that world actually looks like. His hand found mine in the darkness of the car, his grip warm and steady. It's going to be violent. People are going to die. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That knowledge becomes part of you, changes how you understand the world and your place in it. I've been changed already, I said quietly. 7 months on the streets did that. Watching my father die did that. I'm not the girl I was before all of this, Vincent. I'm someone different now, someone harder. I just need to know how hard I'm willing to become. He studied my face in the dim light, then nodded once. Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say when I say it. And if things go wrong, if shooting starts, you get behind Marco and let him protect you. Understood. Understood. We exited the vehicle with practiced coordination, Vincent at the center, Marco and I flanking him, the other men spreading into formation that looked casual but provided optimal coverage and sight lines. We approached the restaurant's entrance where 2 security guards immediately tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Tell Carlo that Vincent Caruso is here to discuss the arsenic he sent to Cesare's, Vincent said, his voice carrying absolute authority. He can let us in peacefully for a conversation, or we can come in forcefully and have a different kind of discussion. His choice, but he has 30 seconds to decide. The guards exchanged glances, one of them speaking rapidly into a radio. I could feel the tension building, could see other security personnel positioning themselves throughout the visible areas of the restaurant. Patrons who'd been dining looked up nervously, some already moving toward exits, survival instincts recognizing that something dangerous was about to happen. 20 seconds passed. Then the door opened and a man I assumed was Carlo Rossini appeared. Late 40s, stocky build, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the thickness around his middle, the face of someone who'd grown comfortable in power and hadn't been seriously challenged in years. Caruso, he said, attempting confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. This is unexpected. And inappropriate. I have paying customers who don't need to witness. Your attempt to murder me? Vincent interrupted, his voice cold. Your decision to terrorize an innocent family, to poison my food, to start a war you can't possibly win? Yes, I imagine your customers would be uncomfortable witnessing the consequences of those choices. Carlo's face flushed, but he maintained his composure. I don't know what you're talking about. If someone attempted to harm you, that's unfortunate, but it has nothing to do with me or my organization. Antonio Moretti, Vincent said flatly. The cook you kidnapped his daughter to course. The arsenic you provided. The instructions you gave him to add it to my meal. We have his testimony, Carlo. We have the evidence. We have everything we need to connect you directly to attempted murder. The word of a frightened cook means nothing, Carlo replied, but I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. You have no proof that would stand up in any legitimate. I'm not interested in legitimate channels, Vincent cut him off, stepping closer. I'm interested in justice. My justice. The kind that ensures you never threaten me or mine again. The tension broke like a snapped wire. Carlo's hand moved toward his jacket and suddenly everything was chaos. Marco shoved me behind him, his weapon appearing with practiced speed. Vincent's team moved with coordinated precision, weapons drawn, commands shouted in Italian. Carlo's security responded, and for one terrible moment, I thought the restaurant was about to become a massacre. But Vincent's voice cut through the chaos, commanding and absolute. Stand down or everyone dies. Everyone. Your men, your customers, you. Is your boss's pride worth all those lives, gentlemen? The calculation was visible on the security team's faces. The recognition that they were outgunned, outmaneuvered, facing men who'd come prepared for exactly this confrontation. One by one, weapons lowered. Not dropped, but lowered, the compromise between surrender and suicide. Clear the restaurant, Vincent ordered. Customers and staff out. No. This is between Carlo and me. It took 5 minutes for the space to empty. Frightened diners hurried out by apologetic staff, workers who recognized when to abandon their posts and survive another day. When the last civilian had exited, Vincent turned his attention back to Carlo, who stood surrounded by his own men but looking increasingly isolated. Your men can leave too, Vincent said quietly. They don't need to die for your mistakes, Carlo. This is between us. Attempted murder deserves a response, but I don't punish soldiers for following orders. They can walk away. Carlo's jaw clenched, but he nodded once. His security team filed out, some reluctantly, others with visible relief. When they'd gone, only Carlo remained, standing alone in his own headquarters, facing the man he'd tried to kill. Why? Vincent asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. You've been operating successfully in your territory for years. We had an understanding, boundaries that kept conflict minimal. Why try to kill me now? Why risk war over expansion you didn't need? Carlo's laugh was bitter. Because you're young, Crusoe. 35 years old and you control half of what my father spent 40 years building. Because you move into legitimate businesses while the rest of us are stuck in the shadows. Because you have politicians and police commanders on your payroll, while we pay tribute to operate in our own territory. His voice rose with anger. Because you represent everything that's changed in this business and men like me are dinosaurs waiting to die. I thought if I removed you, if I created chaos in your organization, I could absorb your operations before anyone else moved. I thought I could turn back the clock to when men like me mattered. Men like you never mattered, Carlo, Vincent said quietly. You inherited your position, coasted on your father's reputation, maintained power through brutality rather than strategy. You represent the old way, the stupid way, of doing business. All force, no finesse. All tradition, no adaptation. He paused. That's why you were always going to lose. Not because I'm young, but because I'm better. The words landed like physical blows, stripping away Carlo's dignity more effectively than any violence could. I watched the older man's face cycle through emotions. Rage, humiliation, desperate defiance. So what now? Carlo demanded. You execute me here? Make an example? Start a war that will get dozens of people killed. No war, Vincent replied. Your organization will be absorbed into mine, your territories redistributed among families who've shown competence and loyalty. Your men will be given the choice, work for me under new management or find employment elsewhere. As for you, he pulled out a gun, the movement casual practiced. Carlo's eyes went wide, fear finally breaking through the bravado. Wait, Carlo said, his voice cracking. Vincent, please. We can make a deal. I have resources, information, connections. I can be useful to you alive. You don't have to. You tried to kill me, Vincent interrupted. You terrorized an innocent family to accomplish it. You chose violence over negotiation, murder over compromise. Those choices have consequences, Carlo. Final ones. I should have looked away. Should have closed my eyes, should have turned my head, should have done anything except watch what happened next. But I didn't. I kept my eyes open, kept watching as Vincent raised the gun, as Carlo's protests turned to desperate pleading, as the inevitability of the moment settled over the empty restaurant like a shroud. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space, echoing off walls and wine bottles and expensive artwork. Carlo fell, the back of his skull exploding in a spray of blood and brain matter that painted the wall behind him in abstract patterns that would haunt my dreams. His body hit the floor with a heavy thud, twitched once, then went still. Vincent stood over him for a moment, his expression remote, almost sad. Then he turned to Marco. Clean team. Make sure there's no evidence that connects back to us. And send word to Rossini's lieutenants. They have 24 hours to declare loyalty to my organization or clear out of New York entirely. No negotiation, no extensions. Marco nodded, already pulling out his phone to coordinate. Vincent moved toward me, his weapon disappearing back into his jacket, his hand reaching for mine with the same gentleness he'd shown in the car. Come, he said quietly. We're done here. I let him guide me out of the restaurant, past the blood and the body and the evidence of violence that would be erased before morning. The cold night air hit my face, sharp and clarifying, and I realized I was shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline, from the visceral reality of witnessing death delivered with mechanical efficiency. In the car, Vincent's hand remained on mine, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on my skin. Are you all right? He asked. I just watched a man die, watched Vincent execute someone with the same calm he brought to business meetings. I'd witnessed the reality of his power, the cost of crossing him, the brutal efficiency with which he eliminated threats. I should have been traumatized, horrified, desperately planning how to escape this world I'd accidentally entered. That I felt clarity. He would have killed you, I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. If I hadn't noticed Antonio's fear, if I hadn't warned you, Carlo Rossini would have succeeded. You'd be dead and he'd be absorbing your organization, and Antonio's daughter would have been murdered to keep her quiet, and all of it would have gone unpunished because the legitimate system doesn't touch men like him. Yes, Vincent confirmed quietly. That's exactly what would have happened. So what you did tonight, executing him, that was justice. Not legal justice, not the kind that happens in courtrooms with judges and juries. But real justice, the kind that actually protects people and stops threats and ensures that attempting murder has real consequences. I turned to look at him. That's what you were trying to show me, wasn't it? Not just the violence but the necessity of it. The reason it exists. His expression was unreadable in the dim light. I was showing you the reality of my world. The complete picture, no sanitization, no softening of edges. Whether you interpret that as justice or just violence is up to you, Sophie. I thought about my father, about how his killers had walked free because the system protected them. I thought about Antonio's daughter who'd been terrorized and would have died if Vincent hadn't responded. I thought about 7 months of being invisible, powerless, subject to circumstances I couldn't control. I want to learn, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. Not just observe, not just exist under your protection. I want to learn how you think strategically, how you identify threats, how you make decisions that keep people safe even when those decisions require darkness. I want to become someone who can affect outcomes rather than just surviving them. Sophie, Vincent started, something almost like concern in his voice. I know what I'm asking, I interrupted. I know what I'm choosing. I'm choosing your world over the legitimate one that failed me. I'm choosing power over vulnerability, agency over invisibility. I'm choosing to become someone who can deliver justice when the system won't. I met his eyes. I'm choosing to stay, Vincent. Completely. Not as a witness you're protecting, not as a temporary guest recovering from homelessness. As someone who wants to learn everything you can teach me about surviving and thriving in this world. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. Then Vincent's hand tightened on mine, his voice dropping to something almost tender. Once you start down this path, there's no going back, he warned. You'll do things that change you fundamentally. You'll make choices that you can't unmake. You'll become someone your former self wouldn't recognize, someone who operates outside the moral boundaries you were raised to respect. I'm already someone my former self wouldn't recognize, I replied. That girl died when her father was murdered and the system did nothing. When her mother chose drugs over survival. When she aged out of care and chose streets over foster homes. I've been dying by degrees for 7 months, Vincent. What you're offering isn't corruption of innocence. I don't have innocence anymore. What you're offering is the chance to be powerful instead of powerless. To matter instead of being invisible. His expression shifted, something like admiration crossing his features. You understand yourself better than most people twice your age, he observed. That's rare, Sophie. That kind of self-awareness, that willingness to acknowledge what you've become and choose what you'll become next. Most people never achieve it. So you'll teach me? I asked. Train me, show me how your world operates from the inside. I'll teach you, he confirmed. But understand what that means. You'll learn strategy, intelligence gathering, threat assessment, negotiation. But you'll also learn violence, or at least understand it intimately enough to direct it when necessary. You'll learn how to read people, how to identify weaknesses, how to exploit vulnerabilities. You'll learn everything that makes me effective, and in doing so, you'll become as morally complicated as I am. I can live with moral complexity, I said. I can't live with powerlessness anymore. He smiled then, genuine warmth breaking through his usual control. Then welcome to the organization, Sophie Chin. Welcome to a world where intelligence and ruthlessness are equally valued. Where loyalty is currency and betrayal is death, where justice is something we create rather than something we wait for others to deliver. As we drove back to Greenwich Village, toward the brownstone that had become my sanctuary and prison and home all at once, I felt something settle inside me. A choice made, a path committed to, a future that would be dangerous and morally complicated but would be mine. Truly mine, shaped by my decisions rather than by circumstances I couldn't control. I'd saved Vincent Crusoe's life by warning him about poisoned food. He'd saved mine by offering me purpose when I had nothing. We were bound now, connected by debts and choices and the recognition that we understood each other in ways most people never would. The homeless girl who'd shivered in doorways was gone completely. In her place, someone harder, sharper, more capable of surviving in a world that ground down anyone who couldn't fight back. I didn't know if that was tragedy or salvation. But I knew it was survival. And sometimes survival was enough. 6 months passed in a blur of learning and transformation. Vincent hadn't been exaggerating when he said he'd teach me everything. I absorbed information about his organization like someone dying of thirst finally finding water. I learned how his legitimate businesses provided cover for less legitimate operations, how money was laundered through restaurant chains and construction companies, how political influence was purchased and maintained, how competitors were managed through combination of negotiation and controlled violence. But I also learned the strategic thinking that made it all work. How to read financial statements to identify vulnerabilities in rival organizations. How to analyze behavioral patterns to predict threats before they materialized. How to build networks of informants and allies who provided intelligence that kept Vincent ahead of his enemies. How to negotiate from positions of strength. How to recognize when compromise was wisdom and when it was weakness. Vincent was a patient teacher, explaining his reasoning behind every decision, involving me in meetings and strategy sessions, gradually giving me more responsibility as I proved my competence. I started by analyzing intelligence reports, identifying patterns and threats. Then I progressed to sitting in on negotiations, observing how Vincent used psychology and leverage to achieve outcomes. Eventually, I began conducting preliminary meetings myself, representing Vincent's interests with people who wanted audience with him but didn't warrant his personal attention. I discovered I was good at it. Not just competent but genuinely skilled at reading people, at understanding motivations, at identifying the pressure points that would make someone cooperate or the warning signs that marked potential betrayal. Vincent had been right about my potential. I had aptitude for strategic thinking that developed rapidly under his mentorship. But I also learned the darker skills. I attended more executions, watching with increasing detachment as Vincent eliminated threats that couldn't be managed through other means. I learned how to identify when violence was necessary versus when it was excessive, how to calibrate responses to send appropriate messages to potential enemies. I learned how to compartmentalize, how to witness terrible things and then return to normal life without letting the trauma paralyze me. The brownstone became truly my home. Maria treated me like family, ensuring I continued eating properly and maintaining the health I'd rebuilt. Dr. Castellano's regular checkups confirmed I'd recovered completely from my months on the streets. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost, my strength had returned, even my cough had disappeared entirely. Physically, I was healthier than I'd been in years. Emotionally, I was something else entirely. Harder, yes, but also more confident. More capable. More certain of my ability to affect outcomes rather than just survive them. The girl who'd frozen in doorways had been replaced by someone who walked into rooms full of dangerous men and commanded their respect through competence and association with Vincent. Our relationship evolved too, though neither of us explicitly acknowledged it. We worked together daily, spent evenings discussing strategy and organization business, fell into patterns of partnership that went beyond mentor and student. The way his hand would find mine during tense moments. The way he'd seek my opinion on decisions before committing. The way I'd catch him watching me with an expression that suggested he was seeing someone he hadn't expected to find. 7 months after the night at Carlo Rossini's restaurant, Vincent called me into his study with an expression that suggested something significant was about to happen. "We need to discuss your position in the organization," he said without preamble. "You've proven yourself repeatedly over the past months. Your intelligence work has prevented 3 potential threats. Your negotiation skills have resolved disputes that could have turned violent, and your strategic recommendations have consistently been sound. You're ready for formal responsibility, Sophie. Not as my student or my protege but as my partner." The word landed between us with weight we both recognized. "Partner," I repeated. "What does that mean specifically?" "It means you become my second," he said. "The person I trust with sensitive operations, with strategic planning, with representing my interests when I can't be present. It means significant authority within the organization, including command over certain operations and personnel. It means people will look to you for decisions that affect their lives and livelihoods. He paused, studying my face. It also means you become a target. Right now you're associated with me, but you're not a primary threat to my enemies. As my partner, that changes. People who want to hurt me will look at hurting you as a viable strategy. The danger you face increases exponentially. I understand, I said, and I did. I'd watched how Vincent operated, had seen the constant security, the threats that materialized and were eliminated, the price of power measured in paranoia and preparation. There's something else, Vincent continued, his voice dropping to something more personal. Something I need to say before you accept this position, before we formalize this partnership. He moved around the desk, standing close enough that I could feel his body heat. You came into my life 7 months ago, a homeless girl warning me about poisoned food. I offered you protection because I owed you a debt. I offered you training because I recognized potential. But somewhere in these months it became more than that. My heart was pounding, anticipation and something deeper making it hard to breathe. More than what? More than debt or potential or strategic partnership, he said quietly. You've become essential to me, Sophie. Not just as an asset to my organization, but as someone I trust absolutely, someone whose opinion I value above all others, someone whose presence in my life has transformed it in ways I didn't anticipate. His hand came up, cupping my face with unexpected tenderness. I'm offering you partnership in the organization, yes. But I'm also offering you partnership in every other sense. My home, my life, my future. Everything I am, everything I have, I want to share it with you. The words I'd been half expecting and half dreading for months were finally spoken, and I had to decide how to respond. I thought about the girl I'd been, invisible, powerless, slowly dying. I thought about who I'd become, Vincent's student, his protégé, someone capable and confident and dangerous in her own right. And I thought about what I felt when I looked at him, this man who'd saved me and challenged me and helped me transform into someone I could actually respect. I love you, I said, the words coming easily because they were true. Not because you rescued me, not because you gave me power, but because you saw who I could become and helped me get there. Because you trusted me with darkness and didn't try to pretend it was light. Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen capability instead of just vulnerability. His expression transformed, warmth breaking through the control he usually maintained. I love you, Sophie Chin, he replied. I love your intelligence, your courage, your willingness to choose hard truths over comfortable lies. I love how you transformed from someone broken into someone extraordinary. I love that you understand my world and choose it anyway. He kissed me then, and it was different from the friendly touches and casual affection we'd shared before. This was claiming possession, the acknowledgement of feelings we'd been circling for months without naming. I kissed him back with equal intensity, my hands finding the planes of his chest, feeling the solid reality of him beneath expensive fabric. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder than we should be, he rested his forehead against mine. So that's yes. To partnership, to staying, to building this future together. Yes, I confirmed. To all of it. To being your partner in the organization and in life. To accepting the danger that comes with it. To choosing this world and you over every safe, legitimate alternative. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm all in, Vincent. Completely. His smile was brilliant, unguarded in a way I rarely saw. Then let's make it official. Tomorrow we announce your position to the organization. And after that, he paused, something almost vulnerable crossing his expression. After that, we plan a future that includes both professional partnership and personal commitment. Marriage, eventually, when the time is right. Children if you want them. A life built together in this complicated, dangerous, beautiful world we inhabit. Marriage. Children. A future that stretched beyond just survival into something that resembled the life I'd thought I'd lost forever. Not the safe, conventional version, but something richer, more complex, more true to who I'd actually become. I want that, I said softly. All of it. The danger and the love and the moral complexity. I want to build something with you that matters, that lasts, that proves we're more than just the violence and darkness we sometimes have to embrace. Then that's what we'll do, Vincent promised. Together. The announcement the next day sent ripples through the organization. Sophie Chin, the homeless girl Vincent had taken in 7 months ago, was now his official second. his partner in strategy and operations, his designated representative in sensitive negotiations, someone with authority that rivaled his own in certain domains. There was skepticism, of course. Questions about whether I'd earned the position or if it was favoritism, if I was truly capable or just a pretty face Vincent had elevated for personal reasons. But over the following weeks, I proved myself repeatedly, making decisions that protected the organization's interests, negotiating deals that expanded territory, identifying threats that more experienced people had missed. The skepticism gradually transformed into respect. I wasn't Vincent's weakness or his indulgence. I was his actual partner, someone who brought value through intelligence and strategic thinking rather than just violence and intimidation. The organization adapted to having two leaders instead of one, learned that my word carried the same weight as Vincent's, that crossing me was equivalent to crossing him. My former life became a distant memory. The homeless girl who'd shivered in doorways, who'd been invisible and powerless, who'd thought she might die without anyone noticing, that person existed only in the past. In her place was someone confident, capable, dangerous in her own right. Someone who commanded respect from violent men and conducted negotiations that shaped criminal enterprises. Someone who understood power and wielded it with competence that had been earned through months of learning and proving herself. But I never forgot where I'd come from. Never forgot what it felt like to be discarded, to be treated as less than human, to survive at the mercy of circumstances I couldn't control. That memory informed every decision I made, every negotiation I conducted, every strategy one recommended. I understood vulnerability because I'd lived it, and that understanding made me effective in ways that people who'd always had power could never achieve. Vincent and I built something together that was greater than either of us individually. His experience and network combined with my strategic thinking and ability to spot patterns created a partnership that made his organization more effective, more successful, more resilient against threats than it had been before I'd entered his life. 1 year after the night I'd warned him about poisoned food, we married in a private ceremony attended only by close associates and the few people we trusted absolutely. Maria cried, happy tears for the man she'd served for decades who'd finally found someone worthy of his trust and love. Dr. Castellano gave a toast about transformation and second chances. Marco, who'd become a friend as well as security, promised to protect us both with his life. I wore a dress that cost more than my father's funeral, that marked how far I'd come from the streets. But I also wore my mother's necklace, the only thing I'd kept from my old life, a reminder that I'd been someone before I became who I was now. Vincent's vows were simple but profound. I promise to be your partner in all things, business and life, darkness and light, danger and safety. I promise to value your strength while protecting your vulnerability. I promise to love the woman you are while honoring the girl you were. And I promise that with me you'll never be invisible again. My vows were equally honest. I promise to be worthy of the trust you placed in me when I had nothing. I promise to use the power you helped me develop responsibly, strategically, with awareness of its cost. I promise to love you without illusions, understanding who you are and choosing you anyway. And I promise that together we'll build something that matters. Justice when the system fails, protection for those who can't protect themselves, and a partnership that survives everything the world throws at it. We kissed as husband and wife, sealing promises that were more binding than any legal contract, creating a partnership that would define both our futures. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. 2 years later, I stood in the same study where Vincent had first offered me partnership, now decorated with photos of our life together. Our wedding, business successes, moments of happiness stolen between the demands of running an organization. I was reviewing intelligence reports, identifying patterns in rival family movements, when Vincent entered with news that would change everything again. We're having a baby, he said, his voice carrying wonder and fear in equal measure. I set down the reports, processing this new information, this new complication and blessing. A child. Our child. Someone who would grow up in this world we'd built, who would inherit its dangers and complexities. Are you afraid? I asked. Terrified, he admitted. Of failing to protect them, of the dangers inherent in our life, of what this world might do to someone innocent. He moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine as it always did. But also hopeful. Because they'll have two parents who understand power and how to wield it. Who'll teach them to be strong and strategic and capable of protecting themselves. Who'll ensure they're never vulnerable the way we once were. I thought about the girl I'd been, homeless and invisible. I thought about Vincent's childhood, watching his father die because he was disposable. And I thought about the future we could give our child. Not perfect, not safe, but powerful. Protected. Loved in ways that included preparing them for the reality of the world rather than hiding it. We'll teach them, I said firmly. Everything we know about survival and strategy and the necessity of sometimes choosing darkness to protect what matters. We'll give them agency, power, the ability to affect their own future rather than just survive it. And we'll teach them about justice, Vincent added. Real justice, the kind that actually protects people when systems fail. The kind we deliver. I placed my hand over my stomach where new life was growing. The next generation of Caruso power, the child who would inherit everything we'd built together. They'll never be invisible, I promised. Never powerless. Never discarded or forgotten or treated as disposable. Never, Vincent agreed. Because they're ours and we protect what's ours with everything we have. We stood together in the study, contemplating the future we'd created and the one we were about to bring into existence. It wasn't the future the homeless girl in the doorway would have imagined. It wasn't safe or conventional or morally simple. But it was ours. Built on choices we'd made, power we'd earned, love we'd found in the darkness. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.